Okay, so we're talking about the ammeter again. So 1975. This time it's a Plymouth Trail Duster. So the ammeter is the source of all the problems. I know some people say it's perfectly fine as long as you don't touch it, you don't breathe on it, you don't sneeze too hard, you don't think about it the wrong way, and then it's going to be fine forever, which is not the case. And the reason why is because there's so much current and power flowing through the ammeter that if you get a weak point in any one of the connections, then they're going to melt. It just happens. I've never seen a Mopar that hasn't had that issue to date. So to the people who've never had that, congratulations, you're the unicorn. But here's why that happens. Okay, so we're going to start from kind of ground zero, and I'm going to show you on the wiring diagram what happens before we go to the truck. So if you're looking at the alternator, you've got the 3-wire Mopar alternator. So you've got your 10 gauge that's coming off the battery terminal, right? So if you follow that down to where that leads, then you see it goes to the bulkhead connection, goes through the bulkhead connection, and we go to the next page, and we see it over here. Okay, so we follow that, and then what happens is it goes to the ammeter. And then it flows out of the ammeter. You got your black and you got your red. And then it goes back towards the engine bay. And then you've got a cycle, which comes back down to the starter relay. So battery power to the starter relay, you see a fusible link here. So what we have is we have one connection, we have a bulkhead connection, then we go to the dash, right? We have a ammeter connection, and then it comes back. This is one of those pressed copper splices from the factory, and then it goes back to the bulkhead connection here, right? And then it comes down on this side to a fusible link. So we have one connection, 2 connections, the ammeter, 3 connections, 4 connections, 5 connections. So there's 5 different places this can go wrong. So when we have a situation where the alternator isn't working, is there 12 volt power at this alternator? Because if all of these 5 or 6 connections along the way are solid, then what you would have is you would have power there, 12 volts with the key off at the alternator. And if you do not, you probably have a wiring problem or a dead battery. So you need to check every single one of these. And if you start checking every single one of these connections, especially if there's an ammeter involved, and later vehicles don't have to worry about this, then what you'll find is you'll probably find multiple breaks throughout this entire system. So let's see what that looks like on the truck. So starting at that spot with the alternator, right? This was my original alternator wire. Did not have an eyelet on it at all. So I've already done some of the work to delete the ammeter, and this is what I'm going to do. But starting at step 1, right? So no eyelet, very frayed cables. Looks like complete crap. Looks like they got kind of hot, kind of burnt. So that's already looking bad. So then we go over to our other spots of concern. Right? Okay, so here we are. When we're looking inside the truck, this is the original fusible link. That is not looking so hot. This one was already all burned up. So it got super hot. You can see it got hot, it got melted, it's all corroded. This side of it was all bad. I've already removed that. So we know that we've had issues there. So I went to the bulkhead connection, and I did a little bit of this work already, kind of in prep, but we had what was essentially a bad bulkhead connection. So here is where that red wire came out, and that red wire was all toasted up and nice and swollen, and it looked like hell. So this is the other end of that fusible link, right? Looks terrible. You can tell that that got hot, that melted, that fusible link is busted. This was the side at the bulkhead. You can see it's all fat and swollen. That's from the heat. So all signs are pointing to we got problems. So moving on. Okay, coming inside the truck. So our ammeter here did not work at all. None of the gauge lights worked. So when we're looking inside the dash, we have the red wire and a black wire. So what I did is I disconnected those from the ammeter and I closed those in a loop. So the ammeter is right there, those two studs. Those have been disconnected, and so now that red wire and that black wire are closed together in a loop. And so in order to do this the best possible way is we bypass the bulkhead connector all together, which looks like this. So you had a black wire and a red wire on that bulkhead connector. Forgive me for the shitty quality video, but there's your black wire, there's your red wire back there. So snip the black, snip the red, and rather than trying to drill out the bulkhead connector and run in the cable, I went through the firewall. And the reason why is because after 50 years, these trucks get pretty brittle with their plastic. So on this guy, on that bulkhead connector, they get fragile and that plastic breaks, and I don't want to mess with it. So all I did is I just came through on that firewall and I ran a new cable. So this is what happens when you do that for an ammeter bypass. You are installing all new cables, and we're bypassing the ammeter. So I start with a brand new cable, 10 gauge off the alternator output. That 10 gauge wire then runs straight to my starter relay here, and you put a 14 gauge fusible link which will connect right to this stud. Then that loop I showed you on the inside where that blackened wire came off the studs of the ammeter, looped together, come out here with a 16 gauge fusible link, and you hook those two fusible links on your stud right here for battery power. So the alternator is going to charge through this black wire straight to here, which is going to also feed power straight to your dash and your fuse block through this fusible link. So these fusible links protect all of your system. So we know that the other one was burned up, which means we had a series of issues. We had a poor connection there. We had poor connection at the firewall. We had a bad ammeter. We had a blown fusible link. God knows what else is going on, but at this point I'm just trying to get the alternator to work. So by putting this all together, fingers crossed, everything should work fine. Okay, so here's a little test. We're going to test the alternator now. I've got all that stuff hooked up. So you've got an input and an output, and one of these, so your green one is what goes to your voltage regulator. So I've got 12 volts here. Now that I've done that full ammeter bypass, right, I've gotten rid of that ammeter. I've spliced these two guys here. I put in brand new fusible links in two different places. I've got an alternator wire running straight from here to here. That alternator wire is no longer going through here. It's going point A to point B with a fusible link. I've got a good fusible link here. My alternator was not charging, so I got to figure out why. And this is how we do it. That green wire goes to your voltage regulator. If your voltage regulator is bad, you will not charge your battery. So I got the engine running, and I have right now 12 volts exactly. Disconnect that green wire from your output so it's no longer going to that voltage regulator. Put a jumper from that green outlet terminal, the outlet, jumper it to your battery. So I've got a jumper wire here, right? When I touch this jumper wire to that negative post, watch the voltage. It starts climbing. The engine load goes down because it's got a big load now. That alternator is engaged, creating a drag. I've got good charging. That alternator is good. That voltage regulator is bad, or at least the wiring. So I'm getting good charge now by bypassing that voltage regulator. Okay, so we tested the alternator, right? We bypassed the voltage regulator with that jumper wire to the battery. When grounding that to the negative, that jumper wire kick-started the alternator and it charged. So I just replaced that voltage regulator. So on these, the grounds are critical. So you've got the grounds where it grounds to the metal. If it doesn't ground correctly to the metal, the thing doesn't work. So make sure those are good. So new voltage regulator, $42, lifetime warranty at AutoZone. So with the ammeter bypass that we did, what we're seeing now is we're charging at 14.6. So this alternator is good. It's cranking out the volts and the amps there through the voltage regulator. The new wiring is good. The fusible links are holding up, so I know all my connections are solid. So yeah, bypassing the ammeter is possible, pretty easy, using all of the steps that we did here, and now we are back to charging. So things are looking up.